So welcome to another deep dive. And today we're going to be looking at Lori Gottlieb's Maybe You Should Talk to Someone.
Okay.
It's a really cool book because it mixes like a memoir with case studies, and it kind of gives you that view of what's going on behind the scenes in psychotherapy. And I think it's exciting because we're not just talking about how therapy works, but we're also talking about what it says about us as humans.
Exactly.
You know, how we change, how we interact, and how we try to answer those big life questions.
Yeah, it's like taking a deep look in the mirror.
Yeah.
Not just at like our own problems, but at like the bigger ways we all act.
Exactly. And one of the things that really struck me was how Gottlieb talks about how therapists are, well, they're human too.
Right.
You know, we kind of put them on this pedestal and think they have it all figured out, but she's a therapist herself, and she ends up going to therapy after a really bad breakup.
Yeah, and I mean, she's not just any therapist. She's like this pro who's written books about relationships and all.
Right.
But even she has to deal with being vulnerable like everyone else.
Right, and she's got a sense of humor about it, too.
Yeah.
Like, she talks about showing up to therapy in pajamas that say namaste in bed.
Right.
I mean, come on, that's relatable.
Told her.
But under that humor, she's dealing with turning 40 and that feeling of, is time slipping away and am I on the right track?
Yeah, it's that classic, what am I doing with my life? Panic.
Right.
But when you see a therapist going through it, it makes it feel more normal for everyone.
Right.
Like, it reminds you that we all have doubts.
It definitely makes therapy less scary.
Yeah.
Less like it's only for people with huge problems.
Totally.
But it also brings up this weird thing.
Yeah.
Lori's a therapist and tells people to go to therapy all the time.
Right.
But now she's the one needing help.
Yeah, it's like this unspoken rule.
Right.
That if you're a therapist, you shouldn't need therapy yourself.
Yeah.
Like, if you admit you have problems, it means you're not a good therapist.
Right.
Which doesn't make any sense.
It's like we expect them to be immune to the things they help other people with.
Exactly.
And then she talks about how weird it is socially when people find out she's a therapist.
Oh, yeah.
Like, every conversation becomes an analysis session.
It's like they think you can read their minds, which is kind of creepy. It makes it hard to just talk normally.
Okay, so speaking of awkward, let's talk about one of Gottlieb's patients, John.
Okay.
He's this successful TV producer, but he's super anxious. And at first, he really doesn't want to do therapy at all.
Yeah?
Especially talking about his childhood.
Right.
He even pays Lori in cash so his wife won't find out.
He's like the poster child for thinking that showing your feelings means you're weak.
Right.
Like, he's built his whole life based on success and control, and therapy is like a threat to that.
Yeah.
Paying with cash is like he's trying to keep it separate from the rest of his life.
It's interesting. He even compares Lori to a mistress at one point.
Oh, wow.
So clearly he's really uncomfortable with that closeness and looking inward that therapy needs.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
But then he has this big change when he starts talking about his son, Gabe, who died. All of a sudden, that tough guy act disappears.
Right.
And you see this raw emotion.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
And it shows you how therapy can unlock those hidden parts of ourselves.
Right.
The pain we try to bury deep down.
Yeah, and it proves that being strong often means admitting when you're hurting.
Right.
Letting yourself grieve and feel those tough emotions.
Yeah.
It's like that vulnerability helps you connect better with yourself and with the therapist.
And there's this other great scene where John is looking at a photo of his family on his phone, and it just hits him.
Yeah.
He realizes how lucky he is.
It's like just looking at a photo helps him be present.
Yeah.
Reminds him of what's really important.
Right.
It's a good reminder that even when things are hard, there's always something to be grateful for.
It's like therapy helped him change his perspective.
Right.
Get out of that negativity loop.
Yeah.
And eventually he even agrees to couples therapy with his wife, Margot.
Wow.
Although he's hesitant at first.
Which again shows he's willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
To face those relationship issues head on.
Right.
Instead of hiding from them.
Yeah.
Like, he's starting to get that you have to get uncomfortable to grow.
So we see John taking those first steps toward being more self-aware and having better relationships.
Right.
Now let's switch gears and meet another patient. of Lori's Julie.
Okay.
Julie's story is amazing because of how she handles this life-changing thing with so much grace and even humor. Julie's this young professor who's diagnosed with terminal cancer.
Wow.
And she's facing death with this mix of courage and wit.
That's incredible.
It's really inspiring. It makes you realize how precious life is.
It does.
And that often it's those tough times that make you face what truly matters.
Yeah.
And instead of giving up...
Julie decides to make a bucket list.
Really?
She wants to go to Kenya and do all those things she always dreamed of.
It's like she's taking back control.
Right.
Even though she's facing something she can't control.
Right.
It shows how much we need to feel like we have choices
to
be a part of what happens to us, even when we know there are limits.
And she does it all with this dark humor.
Yeah.
Like joking about which body parts to keep during surgery.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that takes some serious strength.
It does.
It's a perfect example of how humor can help you cope.
Yeah.
It creates distance from the pain and fear.
Right.
It lets her acknowledge how serious things are without being completely crushed by it.
Exactly.
It's like finding a way to laugh even when you're staring into the abyss, which is so human and relatable.
Yeah.
But under that humor, there's this vulnerability too. Julie worries about her husband finding someone else after she's gone.
Right.
About him being alone.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking.
It is.
It shows how deeply she loves him and all the complicated emotions that come with facing death.
Yeah.
It's not just about her own journey.
Right.
It's also about how her death will affect the people she loves.
It shows how connected we all are.
Yeah. And that brings us to another one of Lori's patients.
Okay.
Rita. Who's at the opposite end of the age spectrum.
Okay.
Rita's 80 years old.
Yeah.
And struggling with really intense loneliness to the point where she's thinking about suicide on her birthday.
That's so sad.
It really makes you think about the challenges of getting older, especially being isolated, which can be so damaging to your mental and emotional health. Rita's had a lot of bad relationships and is really skeptical of therapy at first.
Yeah.
She's basically given up on finding connection and happiness.
I can understand that.
But then something surprising happens.
What's that?
She meets a potential love interest, Myron.
Okay.
Right in her apartment building.
Really?
This totally unexpected meeting kind of throws Rita off.
Yeah.
It challenges her belief that she's too old to find love, which is something a lot of people believe as they get older. It's like a beautiful reminder that life can surprise you.
It is.
That you can find connection when you least expect it.
Yeah.
And Myron isn't just a fling.
Oh.
They develop a really sweet, genuine relationship.
Oh.
And it becomes this catalyst for real change for Rita.
I love that.
It shows that you can grow at any age.
Yeah.
Rita starts to overcome her self-sabotaging habits.
That's great.
And learns to trust and embrace a healthy, loving relationship.
That's awesome.
It's like therapy combined with this new relationship helps her rewrite those old negative beliefs about herself and whether she deserves love. Now, going back to Lori's own journey as a therapist, she talks about this really interesting idea, the power of silence.
Silence. It sounds weird, right? We usually think of therapy as all about talking.
But Gottlieb says those quiet moments can actually be really powerful.
Interesting.
She even describes a whole session with her own therapist, Wendell, where she just cried in silence.
Wow.
No words, just pure emotion.
It shows how important it is to have a safe space.
Yeah.
Where you can just let your feelings out. Sometimes words get in the way.
Right.
And silence lets you really feel those emotions.
It reminds me of that saying, sometimes you just need someone to be there, not to fix anything, but just to let you feel.
That's a good one.
Exactly.
And yeah, silence can be uncomfortable.
Right.
But it can also lead to big breakthroughs.
Yeah.
It's in those quiet moments that we often figure out big things about ourselves. Those aha moments that can really change things.
Now, Lori's book also dives into some really interesting things about human nature. Those patterns we all fall into.
Like what?
She talks about this thing called repetition compulsion.
Repetition compulsion.
Which is basically our tendency to repeat stuff from our childhood. Especially in romantic relationships.
Interesting.
It's like this unconscious need to recreate familiar dynamics, even if they're unhealthy or painful. We're drawn to what we know,
right?
Even if what we know is hurting us. Lori even has this great line, people marry their unfinished business.
Wow.
It's so true.
Yeah.
We often pick partners who are like our parents in subtle ways.
That makes sense.
Playing out those unresolved issues from childhood.
Yeah, it goes back to how our early relationships shape our expectations and patterns in later relationships. And realizing this is key. Because often we can only break free from those patterns if we know they're there.
And one of Lori's patients, Charlotte,
Right.
is a perfect example of this.
Really?
She keeps dating guys who are emotionally unavailable. And she can't figure out why.
Right.
Through therapy,
Yeah.
it becomes clear that she's unconsciously repeating the dynamic she had with her dad,
Who
is emotionally distant.
Classic repetition compulsion.
Yeah.
She's drawn to what feels familiar, even if it ends up hurting her.
But the good news is,
Yeah.
therapy gives you a space to become aware of these patterns.
Right.
Charlotte starts to understand why she makes the choices she does, which gives her the power to start making different, healthier choices.
Exactly.
It shows the power of insight and self-awareness.
It does.
It's not just about changing what you do, it's about understanding why you do it.
Yeah.
And speaking of things that drive us, another big theme in the book is the importance of vulnerability.
Right.
Lori argues that vulnerability isn't a weakness, but a strength.
It's about having the courage to be yourself.
Right.
Flaws and all.
Exactly.
To let go of needing to be perfect.
Yeah.
And embrace the fact that you're not.
And that's often where real connection and growth happen.
Totally.
We see this in John's journey, how he starts off resisting vulnerability, but eventually has these moments of real emotional honesty. And that honesty helps him connect more deeply with Lori. Yeah.
And ultimately with himself.
It shows that therapy isn't just about fixing problems. It's about learning to accept the whole human experience, even the messy, difficult parts.
So what's so fascinating about this deep dive so far is how Gottlieb weaves together her own experiences as a therapist with the stories of her patients.
It creates this amazing picture of human emotion and resilience.
Yeah.
It shows that we all struggle, no matter our age, our job, or what's going on in our lives. We all deal with loss, heartbreak, self-doubt, and those big questions about life.
Right.
And it's through sharing those experiences, sharing that vulnerability, that we find connection and meaning.
Absolutely. And there's so much more to explore.
Stay with us.
Yeah.
As we continue our deep dive into maybe you should talk to someone. It really hits you that no matter what life throws at you, there's always beauty and meaning to be found.
It is. And instead of just like wallowing, Julie creates this bucket list.
Oh, wow.
Like she wants to experience everything she's always dreamed of.
That's awesome.
Especially going to Kenya.
Yeah.
It's like this powerful act of taking charge of her life, even when things are so uncertain.
It shows how much we all want to have control.
Right.
Even when we're dealing with something as unpredictable as a terminal illness, we still want to make choices to shape our own experience, even knowing that there are limits.
And she approaches it all with this dark kind of gallows humor.
Right.
Like joking about picking which body parts to keep during surgery.
Oh my gosh.
That takes serious strength and resilience.
It does.
It's like she's saying, okay, this is happening, but I'm not going to let it define me.
Yeah, humor can be a powerful way to cope.
Right.
It helps you distance yourself from the pain and fear.
Right.
Allows you to acknowledge the situation without being totally overwhelmed by it.
It's like laughing in the face of the abyss.
Exactly.
Which is incredibly human and relatable.
Yeah, you have to find a way to laugh sometime. But beneath that humor, you see this vulnerability. Julie worries about her husband being alone after she's gone.
Right.
About him finding someone else.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking. It reveals the depth of her love and the complex emotions that come with facing your own mortality. It's not just about her own journey, but also the impact her death will have on the people she loves.
It's a reminder that we're all connected.
Exactly. Now let's talk about another one of Lori's patients.
Okay.
Rita, who's at the opposite end of the age spectrum from Julie.
Right.
Rita's 80 years old.
Wow.
And dealing with intense loneliness.
That's tough.
To the point where she's actually considering suicide.
Oh, no.
On her birthday.
That's so sad.
It highlights the unique challenges that come with aging.
It does.
Especially social isolation.
Yeah.
Which can be so detrimental to your mental and emotional well-being.
Absolutely.
Rita's had a history of unhealthy relationships and is very skeptical of therapy initially.
She's basically given up on finding connection and happiness.
I can see why she'd feel that way.
But then something unexpected happens.
What's that?
She meets a potential love interest.
Okay.
named Myron.
Myron?
Right in her apartment building.
Wow, what a coincidence.
Right.
It's like fate intervened.
It's this totally unexpected encounter that really challenges Rita's narrative about herself.
Yeah.
Like she's too old for love and companionship.
Right.
Which is a limiting belief that many people internalize as they age. It's a beautiful reminder that life can surprise you.
It really is.
That connection is possible even when you least expect it.
Absolutely.
And Myron's not just a fling.
Okay. Yeah.
Their relationship develops in this really sweet, genuine way. And it becomes a catalyst for real transformation for Rita.
I love that.
It shows that personal growth is possible at any age.
Yeah.
Rita starts to overcome her self-sabotaging tendencies.
That's cool. And learns to trust and embrace a healthy, loving relationship. It's like therapy combined with this new relationship helps her rewrite those old scripts, those negative beliefs about herself and her worthiness of love. Now, shifting back to Lori's own journey as a therapist, she talks about this fascinating concept.
What's that?
The transformative power of silence.
Silence.
It seems counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, we usually think of therapy as all about talking.
Exactly, but Gottlieb highlights how silence, those moments of quiet reflection, can actually be incredibly impactful.
Interesting.
She even describes an entire session with her own therapist, Wendell, where she just sat there and cried.
Wow.
No words.
Just pure emotion.
It speaks to the importance of creating a safe space.
Yeah.
Where those raw, unfiltered emotions can surface. Sometimes language can get in the way.
Right.
And silence allows for a deeper, more visceral experience of those feelings.
It makes sense.
It reminds me of that saying, sometimes you just need someone to be there, not to fix anything, but just to let you feel.
That's so true.
And while silence can be uncomfortable,
Yeah.
it can also be a catalyst for major breakthroughs.
Right.
It's in those moments of stillness that we often connect with deeper truths about ourselves.
Those aha moments.
Exactly. Those aha moments of insight that can lead to lasting change. Lori's book also delves into some fascinating insights about human nature.
Oh, like what?
Those universal patterns that we often fall into. She discusses this concept called repetition compulsion.
Repetition compulsion.
Which is basically our tendency to repeat patterns from childhood.
Interesting.
Especially in our romantic relationships. It's this unconscious drive to recreate familiar dynamics, even if they're unhealthy or painful.
We gravitate towards what we know.
Right.
Even if it's not good for us.
Lori even has this great line.
What's that?
People marry their unfinished business.
Wow, that's deep.
Right.
It's like we're trying to work out those old issues.
Exactly.
Through our relationships.
We often choose partners who resemble our parents in subtle ways.
Yeah, I can see that.
Playing out those unresolved conflicts from childhood.
It all ties back to attachment styles.
Right.
How our early relationships with caregivers shape our expectations and patterns in later relationships.
Exactly. And becoming aware of this is so important.
Yeah.
Because it's often only by recognizing those patterns that we can break free from them. And one of Lori's patients, Charlotte, perfectly illustrates this.
Okay, how so?
She keeps dating emotionally unavailable men, and she can't understand why.
Yeah, I've been there.
Through therapy,
right,
it becomes clear that she's unconsciously recreating the dynamic she had with her father.
Oh, wow.
Who is emotionally distant.
It's like she's drawn to what feels familiar.
Yeah.
Even though it ultimately hurts her.
But the good news is therapy provides a space to become aware of these patterns.
Right.
Charlotte starts to understand why she makes the choices she does, which empowers her to start making different, healthier choices.
Exactly. It's about understanding yourself better.
Right.
So you can make better decisions.
And speaking of things that drive us, another theme that runs throughout the book is the importance of vulnerability.
Vulnerability.
Lori argues that vulnerability is not a weakness,
but a strength.
Exactly.
It's about being authentic.
Right.
Showing up as you are. Flaws and all.
Letting go of the need for perfection.
Yeah.
And embracing our imperfections.
And that's often where real connection happens.
Right.
And where we can really grow.
We see this in John's journey. How his initial resistance to vulnerability eventually gives way to these moments of profound emotional honesty.
Yeah.
And that vulnerability allows him to connect more deeply with Lori as his therapist and ultimately with himself.
It reinforces the idea that therapy is not just about fixing problems.
Yeah.
It's about embracing the full spectrum of human experience, the good, the bad, and everything in between.
So what's so fascinating about this deep dive so far is how Gottlieb combines her own experiences as a therapist with the stories of her patients.
It creates this rich tapestry of human emotion and resilience.
It underscores the universality of human struggles, regardless of our age, profession,
or life circumstances.
We all grapple with loss, heartbreak,
self-doubt,
and those big existential questions. And it's through these shared experiences, this shared vulnerability, that we find connection and meaning. And there's so much more to explore.
Let's keep going.
Stay with us as we continue our deep dive into the world of maybe you should talk to someone.
Welcome back to our deep dive into maybe you should talk to someone.
Yeah.
We've been uncovering the world of therapy with Lori Gottlieb, and there are still a few more things I want to talk about.
Okay.
One thing that really got me thinking was this idea that therapy doesn't just change you in those sessions. It changes how you experience life outside of therapy, too. It's like what you learn in those 50 minutes on the couch.
Right.
Becomes like training for dealing with real life.
Exactly.
The insights and skills you get there affect how you interact with everyone and everything around you.
Lori talks about how therapy helped her become more aware of her own patterns.
Like what?
Like her defenses, her knee-jerk reactions.
Right.
Those things we all do without realizing it.
Yeah, we all have those.
It's like she got this new lens for understanding herself and also for understanding why other people do what they do.
It's about developing this meta-awareness.
Right.
Being able to step back and just observe your thoughts and feelings without judging them.
Yeah.
And when you're more self-aware, you naturally become more empathetic and compassionate towards others.
Because you realize everyone's got their own stuff going on, their own internal struggles. Which brings up a question that Gottlieb explores.
Okay.
What does it really mean to be present in our relationships?
It's not just about physically being there.
Right.
It's about being emotionally in tune with the other person. Therapy teaches us to be better listeners.
Yeah.
Not just hearing the words, but really understanding the emotions, the needs, the fears behind those words.
Which is harder than it sounds, right?
It definitely is.
It takes real effort to quiet your own mind and actually focus on what the other person is trying to say.
You have to put your ego aside.
Yeah.
Your own assumptions and judgments.
Yeah.
And approach the other person with genuine curiosity, a real desire to understand them.
And that can be tough.
It can.
But it's also so rewarding.
It is.
And Lori doesn't just talk about listening. She also talks about setting healthy boundaries, which is something she had to learn herself.
Especially as a therapist.
Yeah.
Where you're always holding space for other people's emotions. It's crucial to protect your own well-being.
Right.
To know when to say no and prioritize your own needs.
Without feeling guilty, because saying yes to everything can lead to burnout.
Resentment. And ultimately, you can't help others if you're running on empty.
It's like they say you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly.
And therapy often helps us see those patterns of overgiving or people-pleasing that might be draining us without us even knowing it.
Now, let's go back to that concept of repetition compulsion, which is so important for understanding how our past affects our present. Lori uses the example of her patient, Charlotte.
Right, Charlotte.
Who keeps dating emotionally unavailable men, unconsciously recreating the dynamic she had with her dad.
It shows how those early attachment patterns, those blueprints for how we relate to others can stick with us even into adulthood.
It's like even when we want something different, those unconscious patterns can keep us stuck in the same cycles of heartbreak and disappointment.
It's like Charlotte's looking for love in all the wrong places.
Exactly.
And therapy helps her see that. She starts connecting the dots between her past and her present.
Which is the first step to breaking free.
It's a powerful reminder that we're not doomed to repeat our past. Through awareness and effort, we can rewrite those old scripts and create healthier relationships.
Exactly.
Now, Gottlieb doesn't shy away from the tougher parts of therapy. She also talks about the ethical dilemmas that therapists face. Those gray areas where there are no easy answers.
Being a therapist comes with a lot of responsibility.
It does.
Lori talks about how important confidentiality is, protecting her patient's privacy above everything else. But there are times when a therapist might have to break confidentiality. Like if a patient is a danger to themselves or others.
It's a tough call.
It is.
And it highlights the ethical challenges therapists face all the time. Lori also discusses the difficulties of dual relationships.
Dual relationships.
Like when you know a patient outside of therapy.
Right.
Which can be really tricky.
Yeah.
Because it can blur the lines between your professional and personal life and potentially harm the therapeutic relationship.
Right.
Lori gives this example of running into a patient at a frozen yogurt shop with her boyfriend, who Lori knows is cheating on her based on what the patient shared in therapy. Talk about awkward.
That's rough.
It shows the delicate balance therapists have to maintain between being empathetic humans and keeping those professional boundaries.
And then there's the fact that getting good mental health care can be incredibly difficult. Lori doesn't sugarcoat how frustrating the mental health system can be, both for patients and therapists. She talks about the shortage of mental health providers, the long wait lists, the trouble finding therapists who take your insurance, all those obstacles that make it so hard to get help.
And there's still a lot of stigma around mental health.
Right.
This idea that asking for help is a sign of weakness, which stops so many people from reaching out.
Lori encourages readers to advocate for themselves. Research your options.
Ask questions. Don't be afraid to push for the care you deserve. It's a reminder that good mental health care is a right, not a privilege.
Exactly.
And we shouldn't settle for anything less.
And finally, throughout the book, there's this theme of self-compassion that really stuck with me.
Me too.
It's the idea that we're often way harder on ourselves than we are on others.
That's so true.
We judge ourselves, criticize our flaws, dwell on our mistakes. But Lori wants us to be kind to ourselves, to treat ourselves with the same care and compassion we'd offer a loved one. It's about realizing that we're all human.
Right.
We all mess up, and those imperfections are part of what makes us unique and worthy of love.
Absolutely.
And having that self-compassion can be so freeing.
It is.
It lets you let go of the need to be perfect, to embrace your flaws, and approach life with more grace.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into maybe you should talk to someone, what are your biggest takeaways?
For me, it's that we're all in this together. We all have struggles. We all have times when we feel lost or broken. And asking for help, whether it's therapy or something else, isn't weak. It's brave. It shows you're committed to growing.
Absolutely. And Gottlieb shows us that therapy isn't just about fixing problems. It's about understanding ourselves better, connecting with who we really are, and living more fulfilling lives. It's about embracing all of life, the good, the bad, and everything in between.
Maybe you should talk to someone with such a deep and insightful look.
It is.
At what it means to be human, our vulnerabilities, our resilience, and our amazing capacity for growth and connection.
It's a must-read for anyone who wants to learn more about therapy and the incredible strength of the human spirit.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you for listening.
We hope it's made you curious and inspired you to keep exploring the world of psychology and the power of human connection.
Until next time, keep diving deep.